welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. Today we are talking about Willow, the TV show. A little bit about the movie as well, but mostly the TV show. Joining me on this journey is a returning guest, Anne Kirn. She was on last year's Fraggle Rock Return to the Rock episode. And yeah, I'm really excited to get into this one real quick. Before we do that, reminder, if you enjoy this podcast or the trailer reactions, anything else on this channel, please like the videos, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a great deal. And now let's talk about Willow. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Mikey.
I'm really nervous about how boisterous that hi was on this new microphone, but how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
I am doing all right. We got a new very fun fantasy thing to talk about today. We're with this Willow TV show. So I'm at least in a pleasant mood because I just finished watching for the second time the finale, which I think was very, very good. There's no, I wanted to try to get a cram sesh episode for Willow, the movie, going, but like schedule things didn't work out. So let me just ask you ahead of time, what is your history with Willow?
You know, I saw it years ago when I was pretty young. I'm sure not in theaters, but, you know, it was one of those kind of big video store moments for me, I think, of renting something. And because I went on a huge fantasy kick, and at the time I was on a huge George Lucas kick, and I remember really loving it right away. Like, I think I thought it was scary, which I think is fair.
I think that's fair.
But I think I was really struck by, you know, when I was burning through kind of every fantasy thing that I could find, how different it was. That the characters were not really kind of standard fantasy fare, that they were casting people who maybe would not have been leads in other films at the time, fantasy or otherwise. And I just remember being really, really taken with it. And that I loved it a great deal. And I've seen it a number of times since then. I also was going to, you know, before the series started, I was like, time to watch Willow again. Did not do that. Although I think honestly that was not a bad way to come into the series, with kind of having those memories, but,
it can give you
allowing
a little whiplash, I would say, because I did rewatch it again, and it, for people who adore the movie, I understand why they may not love the tone of the show. It is a very different thing, but yeah, I understand why that may happen. But yeah, finish what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that I think that that I actually kind of like that as a version of the perspective on it, of, you know, because that's very much what's happening in the setting. Like the way that they open it is this sort of, you know, it's this half remembered story that's not necessarily totally relevant to the lives of the people who are being introduced as these new characters, but is also like looms very large in their lives, and increasingly so. So I thought it was almost like the same amount of time passed between when I had last seen Willow and you know, sort of the real world timeline for them of when these events had occurred. So I thought that was fun.
Yeah, I really, so my whole history with Willow is about the same as yours. I have definitely rewatched it more recently, I think, than, like, I probably watched it just 2 years ago or something, before revisiting it again before this show. But yeah, I have that same history of, I think it fits in that same realm, kind of, with a clearly lighter tone as your Labyrinth or Dark Crystal. So it was that same era that I was kind of like absorbing all of that stuff at the same time. And yeah, I think that this just carries with it as a franchise a more of like, it's not trying to be like Lord of the Rings. It's not so far removed from that tonally that it's complete, you know, own separate thing. But I think it's, you know, it's this happy medium between the tone of like Lord of the Rings and like a D&D campaign, where it's, even when you think about the old show, it or the old movie rather, it has that sort of kind of cobbled together, like there's a lot of deep meaning in there, but it's still sort of this just like, okay, the troll, what can we do to make a troll? It's a guy in a like a furry suit. Okay, that's fine. Like it has that sort of homely feel to it that, you know, it's never trying to reach the levels of reality of like a Lord of the Rings, and it never goes into the deep dark of, you know, a Game of Thrones or whatever like that. So I have a similar history with it. I definitely like have a nostalgic love for it, but it's still like, you know, it's fairly far down on the list of the things that I love. But yeah, to counter that, I love this show. I really love this show. It is one of my favorite fantasy things to come out in the last few years. And I think it is because it carries that modern, like the way that I said the movie carried D&D kind of mentality to it. I think it did that for sort of the 80s. It was contemporary in that tone for the 80s. And I think that the tone that this show now carries is a contemporary version of that same tone for where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was initially not sure what to expect in terms of just what they were going for, I guess, because I think that, you know, Willow is less known, I guess, and I think less felt like something that was designed to be a franchise. I mean, you know, Lord of the Rings wasn't designed to be a franchise, but I mean, it was always sort of conceptualized as being this tiny portion of a big world, you know? So even before that was the way that people thought about things, it was still being conceptualized in that way. And it influenced fantasy so much. And I never really got that vibe from Willow quite as much. So I didn't know what to think coming in. And I think I was a little disoriented, honestly, by the first episode. And I came out of it thinking, I didn't dislike this, but I'm not quite sure what it is yet. And I saw someone on Twitter, it might've been you actually, say, oh, this is just like watching a D&D campaign. And I was like, that's it. It's that juxtaposition of, you know, having this fairly rich and realized world, but having the characters in it not really be quite ready to take it seriously yet. Yeah. Even as these big things are happening around them, and then kind of maintaining that as a thread of, you know, I even off the bat, like really liked Borman and the idea that he was this kind of, he's the one guy at every D&D table, right? Yep. Like there's always one. Who has played before. And they have that experience, and they, you know, everyone else is like, no, I've got to fill up my form just perfectly, and I've got to line up all my dice, and everything has to be just right. And he's just like, campaign one is the one where I'm starting out strong and we're going into it hard, and then he's on like campaign 2 or 3, like and but still has that energy of like not actually being very good at it at the same time. You know, like they're the ones with experience, but they've learned to relax into it, in part because they know they're not great at it. And so I mean, I just loved that. And I felt so much like the actor from the very beginning, like he knew who this person was, and he was completely committed to that. And it dovetailed so nicely with the script, and that was really delightful, I thought.
Yeah, and that's the thing I can say the most about the show is I think it does such a, like, the original movie is like, it's a romp of an adventure. It's not anything huge or like, it's a dire, like the world's gonna end kind of story, but like, it's more about the characters and living with the characters, because it's more about like sequences than a whole movie. And so I think that they can translate it well into the TV show by just, you take those sequences and make them episodes instead of 15 minutes. They're, you know, 45 to an hour or whatever. And so it allows that connection to character that the movie had, just a lot more like drawn out to allow you to actually meet these people. And you know, it's a similar thing to what like the MCU shows are doing, where it's just like, you know, it's this, I think, handles the overarching plot, I think, better than the MCU shows do. This is legitimately, even beyond the MCU stuff, like I think this is, outside of Andor, the best live action show that has been on Disney Plus so far. And I just think it does a good job of, it's mostly character work, but like doesn't lose the thread through the whole thing. I do think like episode 2 and 3 kind of dip down a little bit after how good episode 1 is, but like it just climbs right back up on a steady click. And so, yeah, I love the way that they handle character in this, because they don't even like worry about you not knowing which one is going to be Alora. Like it's pretty clear from the start, and they give up the ghosts like by the end of the first episode, which is, I think, the right thing to do. Don't hold on to that mystery that is never really a mystery. And you know, I think a lot of people could see that as a flaw with the way that we are sort of built to take on stories now. You know, the whole mystery box thing of like, if there's nothing that I have to solve as an audience member, then what's the point? And I'm just like, no, it allows us to like see the arc of like characters like Kit and Alora actually like becoming friends of one another, instead of just like not opposing forces, but like two forces trying to figure out the same problem from two different directions. Like they actually become friends, and I like the, you know, the path that they took to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very I agree with you that they didn't spend time so much on these kinds of mysteries. Like they gave us a lot of the information that we were going to need, but they still like revealed the details of what that meant to the characters over time. And I like that as a story arc of letting it be, you know, like a classic quest of, you know, that we know what we're trying to do, and the question is, how are we going to get there, and how is it going to change these characters over time? And I can see where, you know, as a modern viewer, that a lot of people might be like, well, that's too simple. And it's like, okay, but also that's something that, you know, makes like tabletop games work incredibly well, that you're able to spend time with characters in unusual situations and figure out like how you can push and pull them apart, and how that changes them over time and their relationships in interesting ways. And I think that really enabled them to do like a really genuine lesbian love story that's like really moving. And
also twists the knight and princess trope, not like on its head, but like enough to feel fresh and not just the same trope over and over. I really like how they handled that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were able to subvert a lot of things without spending a huge amount of time being like, hey, look what we're subverting. That it was just something that was able to unfold on screen, which is, you know, really nice thing to see. And I think especially on Disney Plus, you know, I mean, under the sort of weight of this giant corporation, to be able to do stuff like that, that's sort of smaller scale and more authentic, is really refreshing.
Yeah, and it's not like I adore the whole of like the live action Star Wars output. But other than Andor, I think it has had a little bit of a problem figuring out like what the format is. The MCU shows have the same problem, where they I think She-Hulk actually handled it best, where it was like, no, our format is a half-hour sitcom kind of. So but this actually, like, every episode of this show is an episode of a TV show, and it is like so simply designed that it works better in the format than I think most of the Star Wars stuff outside of Andor, because Andor is just so good. But like they managed to actually, like, maybe it just took this much time. You know, I don't, maybe the pandemic caused things to stretch out to a point where they like couldn't find their footing with a lot of this stuff earlier on, and it just happened to hit with this. But like, they managed to actually make a TV show that is just a TV show, and it's crazy to just be like almost applauding that, but I am, because it is,
yeah,
it's a relief in a way, and it's also just like the way that they capture the tone of this show. Like I'm going to keep coming back to the tone of the show because that is part of the thing that I love the most about it. And the way that they captured the tone in this, and just like, it's very clearly a 2022 show, right? Like it ends with licensed music, and like there's a lot of stuff that makes it a Today show, but they got that tone still, disregarding the licensed music. They got that tone of that 80s fantasy, which is like, yeah, there was darker fantasy stuff as well back in the 80s, but like a lot of it was sort of jovial in a way. Especially when you think of like 80s cartoon fantasy, which is like, I would say a lot of people our age is probably more connect with like the animated stuff of the era than the live action stuff of the era. And I think that this show manages to capture that tone and bring it to today in such a crazily successful way that, like, I know they haven't officially announced season 2 or anything, but I'm glad that they set up the thing. Like, there's spoilers officially, I guess, now, but like they set up at the end of the finale, like, that it's 3 volumes, which would imply 3 seasons, which I'm like, awesome. And that, like, it's not even just that it's, you know, more seasons possibly coming. It's also that they have like, oh, they have a 3-season story to tell, which also implies they don't intend to go longer than they need to, which I'm just like, yes, perfect. That's all I need. I don't need, like, we got to find a balance in the modern age of television of like network TV shows that went for 14 seasons versus like streaming stuff that, you know, can get canceled after 1. Or, you know, just because it's a smaller season on top of that with how we get things now too. So I'm just super, super pleased with it. But yeah, I think maybe let's keep going on characters, I think, because for the most part, that's where the meat of this is. And you brought up the romance in this, and it's one of my favorite romances of like the last decade, basically, because it's just, we don't have to worry about the meet cute or anything. We're just sort of in the meat of the will they won't they at that point already, and it's just a really fun and not taking itself too seriously kind of romance on the screen, which is like, it's very much a young adult kind of relationship, and I really like how it was handled, and was really mad when at one point it seemed like it was all going to happen, and then they ripped it away in the middle of the season. And I was like, legitimately end of an episode screaming at my screen. But yeah, what else about like certain character dynamics did you find more interesting on the show?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a good segue actually, because I felt like that was a really honest, like, young people romance, because it was that we already kind of knew from the beginning that they loved each other, and it was really more about figuring out what that meant, and that had to do a lot with figuring out who they were. And I think, you know, that's very much like what Alora's arc is. Even what Willow's arc is, I think, you know, trying to figure out how he actually fits into this larger world at this point. And I think, like, just continuing to play with that through the season. I mean, the same with Graydon, and, you know, again, spoilers, like, we get to see that, because it kind of felt like, I thought, well, they didn't ditch this character, because I did enjoy his character arc of sort of learning what sort of person he was, and then
He's also
unexpectedly
like the biggest name actor on the show, basically.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
outside of Warwick Davis, yeah.
But sort of learning who he was, and his sort of arc of, I guess really kind of a moony relationship with Allura. But that I thought, well, okay, I guess they kind of completed his story arc, right? Like maybe there wasn't anywhere else they could go with this character. And then what they do at the very end is say, wait, there is somewhere else we can go with his character. And another way to introduce kind of conflict and interest there. And I really liked Allura having the time to decide that maybe Eric was not her cup of tea. I thought that was there was something really powerful about that, of it being set up so clearly as like this really neat and tidy, very, very YA romance. And then
Cinderella
being like
story, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then being like, well, it's not necessarily that he's a bad person or that he deserves to die or that she was somehow wrong about him or wrong about caring about him, but that she gets to realize like, no, this isn't the person that I need for who I am now, like, and sort of understanding who I am now, because she met him when she was not really sure who she was. And I think there's a lot of like maturity in these kinds of arcs for these characters. And they're like weirdly healthy in the course of all of these terrible things happening to them. And I thought that was fun. Like it didn't feel like it was being played for some kind of soap opera drama. It did feel like the way that people that age would interact with each other. I mean, in real life, obviously, not having quite so much trouble with, demon possession, I would hope.
I was even going to say probably not even as overt, just because, it is written as a show. So they are kind of like, it's all the accuracies of it with more intent behind it, because obviously like if like it's hard to like, there's parts of this where I'm like, so they're supposed to be teenagers, right? Like I think they're supposed to be teenagers. I think it's been realistically by the actors' ages, it's been like 25 years, but like I think it's actually supposed to be between 16 and 20 years. So I don't really know how old these characters are, but like the way that they act is a little beyond their years with how forward they are with like the realizations that they do have. But I think that's fine, because it obviously like it's written for a TV show. It's not how it is in real life, because like no kid has the bravery that Graydon had in that moment where he goes, "I love you, but all that I care about is that you're happy." Like no kid has that courage and like well thought out place in his life to be able to do that. But like, I appreciate that they got there, because it does show, especially like this is a kid's kind of thing, or more than that, it's a family style show based on a family movie. So it's, I think it's good to show that kind of outcome for people, because I think a lot of the time with young adult stuff, in particular, like teen comedies and whatnot, you have the grotesque side of it that leaves with the wrong messaging, even though it's like we all as a society got to the point where we're just like, that's an adorable story, and then you look at it and you're like, oh no, that's actually like a really messed up thing that character did. But I think that it's a good thing to have this sort of, not like character role model, but like role model of a series of events for these characters, in the way that they interact with one another and grow to care about one another, and figure out that like that care doesn't necessarily mean one thing. I think I really like how that was handled as well. But yeah, I don't even know where, like, I want to keep talking about Borman, but I'm just like, how much can we say about Borman beyond like, Borman is just like the best character on the show because he's fun. But yeah, it's, I don't know, what's some of the stuff that like surprised you with this cast of characters?
I think I was actually, I mean, not to talk more about Borman, but I actually really liked his interactions with Jade in particular, because I felt like she was the most kind of grounded and consistent character. Like, I think despite, that there are sort of revelations for her and her identity over the course of it, it doesn't really change the way that she feels about things. I don't think as much as it does some of the other characters. Like, I think she kind of already knows mostly who she is and what she wants and what's important.
Her path didn't change, just sort of her surroundings did.
Yeah. And I think she was kind of challenged in her convictions, but they didn't change her convictions. And I thought that they played off of each other really well, because they're somewhat similar characters in some ways, but their personalities are so different. And I mean, I think that there was a lot of good pairing work in that sense of how do you kind of recombine these characters to let them play off of each other, like especially in kind of one-on-one scenes, to do something interesting. Like, I think Willow and Alora's relationship is really interesting. I kind of want to give a shout out in particular to Kit's character. Like, I mean, I think when I was younger, I would have thought she was just incredibly cool, and I love the idea of letting the princess kind of also be the Han Solo, of it being both.
It's a Lucasfilm thing. There's got to be a Han Solo, and in this show, there's kind of three. But it's fine.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I think especially like I thought that her actress was. I mean, that was a tall order. I think to fill that kind of role in a show like this,
and she wasn't.
And she is relatively young.
She replaced somebody else that was originally cast on the show.
Oh, really? I didn't actually know that.
And that's like, I just found that out the other day, and it's just like, man, that is for like, you are that character to me. Like, I see that character as it's like, it's the Star Wars casting where it's just like, that's who I see when I see that actress now. So it's unbelievable. When I first watched the first episode, I completely forgot that this was going to happen, but I was like, man, Kit has such like late 80s, early 90s Christian Slater energy. And then as soon as the episode ended, I was like, oh, right, Christian Slater's in this show at some point. And I was just like, man, that is such a crazy thing, because it's like she's playing up the traits of Mad Mardigan, obviously, but like, somehow it's just the hair, because it's such a similar haircut to his, but like, it just plays as such Christian Slater to me, and I think that's a really good take on the Han Solo rogue kind of. And it's just it leads her on a path of she's debonair but doofy in the right way, where like playing it cool, but immediately something will happen and it's a goofy moment, and it just works. And part of that's the writing, part of that is the performance, and part of that is just the whole cast together. And I really liked how that happened. And then, like you said, with the pairings, I just like her with Jade is a fantastic just through line arc for the whole show. But the way that she plays off of Elora, and the way that she plays off of Borman too, like, like she's going to basically be Borman at some point in the future. And it's kind of funny to see like Borman is the character who is just like, yeah, I used to be you, but now I'm just like, whatever, man, just roll with it. And then she is in that early stage of like, she's gonna learn, just roll with it at some point, but she's just sort of just, my quest has to be mythical. My quest has to be very important. And it is, but like, it can be fun too. And I like the sort of look into the future that we get with those two characters playing off one another as well. So, yeah, I think I agree with you that it's kind of like maybe not a beginning and an end point, but kind of a beginning and a middle point of a similar arc. And yeah, I mean, I think we don't get a lot of
there was an 80s style and maybe a little bit into 90s, like leading man kind of rogue character, rogue in the non Dungeons and Dragons sense.
Right.
Who
but also many of those rogues are played this way.
That is true. Yeah. That is very true.
Critical
but
Role,
yeah, I mean, I think yeah, but there was this kind of there was a little bit of an innocence to it that I think has changed now, that now we're sort of like, no, those roguey kind of bad, they're also kind of bad boys, and they're kind of jerks, and you know, like, or they're immature, and they need to grow out of that, and they have to change. And I think there were occasionally characters where you didn't feel that way, where it was like, no, they're actually just kind of a goofball, and that's just sort of how they are, and it's not something that's wrong with them. And I think that she really managed to kind of nail that vibe of, you know, sometimes somebody's going to do something that's selfish or is a bad choice, or impulsive, but they're not doing it for like bad motivations or because they're you know, somehow like problematic people. And I really think that I saw her performance even tick up a notch, like having during and after that episode with Christian Slater. Like, I mean, that's got to be a lot to hold your own. You know, you're already in you know, this major property, and that's a lot of weight to carry as a young actor. But then to be like, okay, now I'm doing a scene with Christian Slater. Okay. But I really feel
and he's
like
sort of playing my dad, but not my dad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a short arc, but it was a very complicated one, I think, emotionally with this character. And she played it so well. But I also think that if I felt like the episodes after that she was kind of using that, I'm just sort of wondering whether, you know, his energy kind of brought her to a better understanding of who that character was supposed to be and how to play them. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe I should give all the credit to her, but you know, well, I think that does happen.
You got to assume, you know, a full season of TV takes a while to make, and an inspiration to like find your path through in a performance is gonna come off of the people you're playing with. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case too. But yeah, I think that it could also be played as that's just a turning point for that character, sort of, because it's almost like she has her uncle back the way that it's played, because she has this little bit of connection to Allagash that way, his character, where he was somebody that was alongside her father, similarly to Borman, even though that she like, I guess, didn't really know them at all, but like it still has a little bit of connection to her dad, where it does play a little bit to me like she had just enough familial sense with him, because the traits that he carried that were similar to her dad's, that where it gave her that little bit of a push as a character to re-up on her confidence a little bit. And so yeah, I think that character is really good through the whole show, but yeah, that back half it's like sort of like you get the training montage with Allura and all that stuff, and she is equally a main character, but I almost think that it's Kit's show more than anything, at least the way that this season has played out. I'm sure next season it'll maybe be a little more Allura with the awakening of powers that she had at the end of this.
Yeah.
But I like that even with that, they found balance for characters to, you know, one person had like she got a +1 to magic, and Kit got a +1 to armor, and like everyone got a +1. Borman's was self-realization. I don't know, but like everyone did at the end get like a little bit of a plus, and I think that just goes to show like they did like care a lot about making sure that everyone in this cast got a little bit of something fulfilled through the whole show, because you know, with this isn't a huge ensemble, but with ensembles, one or two people tend to get, you know, a little left by the wayside, and I don't think anybody did in this show.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, interestingly, we have basically not talked about Willow at all, even though he is the title character.
It's
so I
funny
feel like we
should. He's Luke in The Last Jedi, kind of like he's more willing to go on the adventure, but like I think he's sort of that semi-retired out of circumstances that arose. He pulled back from the spotlight a little bit, and I think that actually like it does work for this show, even though it's called Willow. Like it's the spirit of Willow that is going through it, and we get that in the final episode where he has a little bit of a monologue inside of Alora's head of like, I'm always here with you no matter what, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
And then so that's sort of my mentality on Willow, is just like he's the backbone but not everything else about the body that's moving. But
yeah, I mean, I think I liked the way that he was included in the show. I mean, I think that the sort of archetypal mentor figure usually has some kind of short dramatic arc, and then honestly usually winds up getting killed off, right, so that the hero can go on their journey. And I kind of liked the idea of him continuing, but also kind of it being clear that he has other things that he cares about too, and like allowing those things to also be important, and give him the source of conflict that that, I mean, they haven't really addressed it yet, and I think they are probably going to potentially in the next season. But they sort of mentioned that like his son ran away, like he's had difficulties, he's trying to keep his community together, but I think that relies on a lot of artifice on his part that he doesn't seem to be. He initially is kind of like, yeah, this is just what I do now, but then as soon as he's with these other characters, he just seems like he's kind of tired of the act, which is understandable. And that it's also kind of caused him to doubt himself. And I think they did give him a much subtler but also satisfying arc of kind of allowing him to sort of remember that he is actually capable, by watching these sort of young people become more capable. I don't know if you saw when the series was in production that Warwick Davis posted a video like introducing the younger cast members, which was
I may have,
it's very
but it was
wholesome.
a while ago at least. So.
Yeah, it's pretty wholesome. It's very fun. We should dig it out and watch it again. I'd love to see it again, actually, now that I have some familiarity with these actors and the characters they were playing. But it's basically just him kind of walking around being like, hey, it's so exciting, we're on the set, we're doing Willow again, and I'm back, and like here's all these young people, and they're kind of like, wow, you're so old and I don't really know who you are. And it's kind of the them ribbing him and him ribbing them. And it's honestly, it's very charming. And I feel like there's a nice parallel in the production of the show, and also the concept of what's actually happening on screen of it. Yeah. We're bringing back this person who was the hero in this old story, but now this is a new story. And what does that mean for the old hero? Like, and I think letting him stay through the arc of this story was really interesting and good.
Well, yeah, and you say for like the old hero versus the new hero, and like he has his own hero's journey in this, which is like you were just saying a minute ago, like a lot of the time with a hero's journey, or every time, that is why it's a hero's journey, but like you have the moment of despair where they're about to give up, and like even Willow has that, even though he's not the main hero of this show. And granted, it's a little bit like, okay, but I would have liked to see him jump down that waterfall. But still, like it's interesting that they were able to work that in for his character on top of everybody else. And that's where I was saying everyone got a plus. Yeah. Like Willow's was belief in himself, confidence, self-confidence, and it's just really amazing to me to see. Like, I can watch a million prestige shows, I can watch the lesser TV, whatever, there's just not that much care given for every person in a show a lot of the time. And maybe it's because it is this small focused group on an adventure where it's like you have to focus on multiple people at the same time because it is only them outside of like, you know, showing up and finding out one of them has a sister in the forest. But like, you have to actually be able to care about every character on the show because there's only 6 characters on the show. And you know, it's just, I'm kind of astonished the level that they were able to balance all that out. Like that's the thing I think I take away the most, as much as like I really enjoyed the ride the whole way, and I think there's a good emotional impact in the finale and all that stuff. I just think it's sort of a miracle that they made every character on the show somebody that I care about, because it's that's just rare. And I don't, even on Andor, like there's characters that are like main characters where I'm like, I don't know their name. Like, cool, that was a cool little thing that just happened. I don't know that person's name. And now they're dead. But yeah, it's just one of those things where I'm like, just the actual like creative side of it, I'm insanely impressed by what they managed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think ensemble is like real ensemble is a little bit of a lost art these days, because so many of the shows that otherwise would have strong ensembles and that, you know, have great casts and they still have great characters and everything, there is this tendency to, in the interest of being prestige and be dark, you know, like you have to give somebody a really, really intense episode, or you have to kill off a character, or you have to kill off many characters. And sometimes that means not really giving the characters space to sort of be together and do things and let that tell the story. You know, I mean, I'm a big proponent of bringing back filler episodes, to be honest, of like putting characters in silly situations and seeing what they do.
That's what's kind of funny about this show is, besides the opening episode and the finale, I would say the 6 other episodes would be considered filler episodes on any other TV show. There's the one where they're like in Bavmorda's castle, and it's just like it's them in a haunted house. Like that is straight up just a filler episode of any other TV show from the 90s. And yeah, it's such an interesting thing that they did that too. Yeah.
I think it benefits from that a lot, and I think that it benefits from having minimal acting to tennis balls on a stick. That there's really very little CG. That almost everything that you're seeing is done practically, and if you, to some extent, I think this is that maybe somebody told them if you can't do it practically, don't bother. You know, I think they didn't. You know, obviously there are some CGI set extensions and some backgrounds and things, but a lot of that was what you were seeing. Yeah.
It was still even with that stuff, a lot of the time it was volume stuff. So it was still people on screen together with some set dressing.
Yes.
And then, you know, a sunset in the background was the volume or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those scenes generally were the best ones that kind of, and I guess I'm a little bit biased maybe, that I liked that kind of older stuff where you couldn't do those kinds of things. But I do think that it really enabled them to focus more on the characters instead of being like, well, now we have to show you this giant spider and we paid a lot of money for it, so we got to show it for quite a while, but it's not really there, so they don't really know how to respond to it. You know, I mean, so I felt like the battle sequences were exactly the length that they should have been. You know, nothing felt too dragged out. I do think, you know, going back to what you said about the length of the episodes, I feel like they were right in that sweet spot, and not deviating from it, where, you know, something starts to feel like, man, I don't know, maybe this is just 3 minutes too long. That there's a reason why, you know, TV shows, aside from advertising, were the length that they were, because they had this really perfected rhythm of how you tell the story so that it feels satisfying. Yeah, you know. And I think they really had that down, that none of the episodes felt like they were too short or too long. They felt just right.
Yeah. And to go like sort of back to that even more is like, they left me wanting that, like, and I say that as the complimentary version of that, which is,
yeah,
I actually wish the episode was like 5 more minutes because I just enjoyed my time with the episode, not because I, wish they had more story to tell or something. It left me wanting to just exist with it more. And that's, I think, the biggest compliment that you could probably give to pacing is that it was completely satisfying. I just wish there was more because I love it so much. And yeah, I can't, I really can't get over how they managed to pull this one off. It's just a very peculiar miracle that they were able to, like, it's Willow. Like, how are you gonna, like, bring Willow back? And, like, yes, there is a dedicated fan base for Willow, but it's niche. It's all things considered, it's fairly niche, and it's, it was never going to be like, the ratings on it, I guess, are a little bit low, but it's just like, it was never going to be The Mandalorian. It was never going to be any of those. It's based on Willow. So I think it succeeds in not worrying about the audience as much and just telling the story that it wanted to tell and being faithful to that lineage of, like, it's a movie. It's not like, yeah, there were a couple of novels written and, like, you have the comic adaptation of it and stuff.
Yeah, I do. I have the comic book adaptation from Marvel Comics with Spider-Man in the corner. Just that's very funny.
Everything that high fantasy needs, a little Spider-Man.
Yeah,
I think that they managed to kind of do the unthinkable with the show. And, like, I don't think Willow is the best thing in the world of all time, the original movie, but there is a adoration of it for a lot of people. And I think that the best thing that they could have shot for on this was to at least, like, succeed in meeting that and at least, making sure that it feels right to follow that movie up. And I think that they did that and more and exceeded that by a great deal. I think maybe it's detrimental to the original movie, and teenagers who get into this show may not be able to go back to that movie because it is like, that movie, the pacing of that movie is bizarre. It is not it is not 3 acts. It is, like I was saying earlier, it's kind of just like a bunch of 15-minute vignettes that happen. It's like the slapstick in it is very, like, airplane slapstick instead of being just kind of like for the world slapstick. And that's where I'm always, like, kind of laughing at the idea of anyone that's just like, why is this so jokey? I'm just like, dude, there is they mentioned in the finale of the show, there was a guy that got rolled up in a snowball. Like, it is a cartoon fantasy movie that happens to be real life. But yeah, I think that they managed to surpass all of that with the original and make something that, you don't have to worry about that first movie. If you want that extra context, you can have it. But they explain everything here that you need to know.
Yeah.
They make you, like, Willow is a perfectly fine character in the original movie. I give so much more a shit about Willow as a character just because of the amount of time and energy that he has spent with other characters in this, instead of just being like, what the F, Mad Mardigan, like, over and over and over. So yeah, I just I'm really happy with where they came out on this one, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we get that official word soon. Warwick Davis did tweet out, like, something along the lines of, like, here's to season 2 or something. And yes, that could be a plea, like a public plea from him being like, okay, everybody watch the show to let us be able to make more of this. But I choose to think of it as him having loose lips and not being able to keep a secret. Just because it makes me much happier that way. But yeah, I'm very happy with how it came out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think they have some really good and interesting places that they can have even more ownership of to go in the future, which is great. Like, I love to see that, to be able to sort of deviate further from the source material. I mean, I think they integrated it really elegantly. I loved the kind of like smoky inclusion of some of these little pieces of footage from the original films. I felt like that worked incredibly well. Like, it could have been really campy and it wasn't.
Better than the Star Wars deepfake stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, yeah. It felt really organic, and it made sense, I think, narratively, and it was just very clever. But yeah, I mean, I think my sort of hope, the one thing I will say for the next season is that I just hope they keep kind of banging that diversity drum, that's something that they don't give up on, because you know, I mean, I think that one of the reasons that Willow is very fondly remembered is, you know, putting somebody who looks different in a lead role, and figuring out how to make it work, you know, not saying like, oh, we can't do that because it's, you know, oh, for practical reasons, or, oh, the audience won't relate to them or whatever, that they just did it and it did work. And I think that, you know, they did some really good stuff and some cool stuff in this season. And I just hope they keep doing that, and not sort of, I think there's always this trap doing fantasy of falling into some tropes that come from some really problematic places, unintentionally, and in most cases, I think. But
white Europe,
I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or, you know, I mean, I think there was a little bit in this season of kind of relying on the idea that you want to represent evil as being kind of like deformed, or, you know, like, oh, when you go evil, you have a lot of scars and you look sort of like you've been burned. You know, I understand the kind of the reasoning behind those decisions. But at the same time, it's kind of like, let's keep challenging some of these tropes. Like, you've done a great job challenging some, let's challenge some more. And, you know, bring in more cast members, and, you know, have fun with it, do something different and cool.
And follow up on where Kit's mom's sword is. Because I think it's just in the forest now.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because that was actually a thing a friend DM'd to me last night after the finale, was about that. And I was like, well, in theory, that's a good thread to follow up on season 2, is to get her. It's a reason to get them back to the forest, to get back to that encampment of people and characters that we like only got to experience for a brief time, but like very quickly became endeared to the audience. Like Laurie's great. But yeah, I am with you on all of those fronts, because there's I have my adoration of the Evil Dead franchise, but it follows that same, like, everything evil has that decayed kind of face to it. And this, I think that the stuff in this movie is very much in the same line of Evil Dead design stuff. And I think that it manages to toe that line enough where it fulfills the connective tissue with the design work of the movie. But where it leaves off allows us to move forward from that, because of the alternate or evil Allura that Graydon comes into contact with. Like, I think it gives us a little bit of leeway to like move forward from that. And maybe they just needed that branch work to be able to go away from it. I don't think that that's necessarily a conscious thing that they did, but like it's probably something that organically happened, that needed to happen organically. And so yeah. I mean, I mostly, I think I just thought that Lily, I thought that her actress was so good, and I genuinely thought she was much scarier in a rhinestone encrusted dress than as the crone. You know, that was she was much more intimidating, I think, and frightening that way. So I was kind of like, do you really need to do that part, or can you just let her be scary as she is? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly, I'm interested to see what else they will do and where else they can go with these characters. And I think, you know, I agree with you that even though the stories were complete and good as they were, these are characters that feel worth spending more time with.
which is always a good thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to leave this off. And thanks for coming back on.
Of course.
Hey, we didn't even talk about the fact that I think there's a Henson creature in this. I think the little sound, I think it's a Henson creation.
It sure looked like it. So I actually don't know. I think sometimes I don't read stuff about special effects characters until after I've watched something, because I want them to have that reality in the moment. And I think that was a great character. But yeah, it did look very Henson-y, so I think you're probably correct.
Cool. Well, I'll make sure that every time you're back, there's some sort of Muppet related thing to come to.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, thanks again. And until next time, bye.